Hey there, this episode of the podcast is a bit different. We are focusing on ideas for improving Dinoland USA. I'll give my thoughts, your ideas. Will this be the countdown to extinction for Dinoland, or will the land escape the asteroid just in time for a brand new, amazing future? Those questions and more will be answered here on the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks for joining me here on episode 156 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I'm your host, Dan Heaton. I am going to quickly set the stage for what we're going to do on this episode. If you have heard my past Improving Epcot podcasts and Improving Disneyland's Tomorrowland podcast, you get the idea for this. Basically, it's a fun way to look at an area that I feel like is cool, but could be even better. And I'm going to go through my ideas for what I would do to improve the land. Now, I don't expect these to happen. These are not predictions. These are not things where I think if I did this, everything would be perfect. I'm not an Imagineer. I don't have that expertise. So really, it's just a fun way to come up with some different ideas for what to do about a part that not all of us love every part of it. There are elements of Dinoland that are amazing, others, we'll see. And so I reached out, and some of you were kind enough to give me your ideas. And I also checked in with some former podcast guests to get their thoughts. So I'm going to give my ideas, and as I go through, also include their ideas that I'm going to respond to each one. It's going to be super fun. I can't wait for us to dig into it. Quickly, before I get there, I just want to say thank you to the members of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon. If you would like to learn how to help support the show and get access to some really cool perks, go to patreon.com/tomorrowsociety. You can also support the show by buying me a Dole Whip. Now, I don't mean going to Disney World, Disneyland, and purchasing one and handing it to me. It's just a way to give kind of a one-time thank you level of support. You can go to tomorrowsociety.com/Dole Whip to learn more. Now that we are through all that, let's get to it. Let's dive into improving Dinoland USA. Going to start by giving my overall thoughts about Dinoland USA as it stands right now. We went to Disney's Animal Kingdom in May of 1998 when it first opened and didn't have that many attractions, but still, it was a brand new Disney park. Come on. But it's interesting because the two main areas in terms of attractions were Kilimanjaro Safaris and the entire Africa area, and Dinoland, because Dinoland USA had Countdown to Extinction, which very similar in terms of ride system to Indiana Jones, which had opened several years earlier, but still brand new e-ticket level for the time attraction for Disney. So those are the two big spaces. But since that time, I feel like Disney hasn't expanded on it well and really taken advantage of the concept. And now you have a situation too where Universal has added in Velocicoaster. They have a really cool looking dark ride in their new park in Beijing. So now anything Disney does in terms of dinosaurs is always going to be compared to that. Universal has had their Jurassic Park attractions for a long time, but it's very different now. So that's kind of the landscape right off the bat. And for me, I've always enjoyed the area. I feel like especially the Countdown to Extinction, now Dinosaur attraction, has always been fun for me. I think the ride system has a lot of potential. Kind of the offbeat pre-show is fun, the Dino Institute. And the ride itself, when it's really firing on all cylinders, has some good jump scares and neat effects. I would love to explore it when it's lit up and walk around it because I feel like you don't get to see really how everything works. And it's all kind of a blur and a bit of an assault on the senses. And you get done, you're like, whoa, what did I just experience? Which I think is partially by design. So, using that as a background, I'm going to say up front that I am not going to remove Dinosaur. And overall, I'm not going to lose the theme because I don't feel like the issue is the overall theme. I'm talking just the most basic thing, dinosaurs. I think even calling it Dinoland USA is fine because the USA part's a little weird, but I guess we are in the United States, so you can call it that. And just what it really needs, though, is updates across the board. So let's focus in first on the dinosaur attraction. This is not me trying to be nostalgic because really I like the new version as much or more than the original, but we're going to change it back to Countdown to Extinction. And one, because it actually tells you what's happening. Dinosaur is the most generic name. I know it's based on a movie, but people don't really have a lot of fondness overall. I know there are people out there for the dinosaur film. It doesn't really do anything for merchandising. There's not a real benefit for Disney to call it Dinosaur, except for it just sounds really generic, where Countdown to Extinction tells you something about what you're doing, which is you go back in time and there's a countdown and you could become extinct and the asteroid's coming and you've got to get out of there. So call it that. Disney's been getting to the point where they want to make the names really long. No colons this time, though, I have to say. But like Star Wars : Rise of the Resistance, or the Guardians of the Galaxy mission -breakout, or come on, guys. But seriously, I like the idea of changing it. And as part of this change, we're just going to go through and freshen up everything. And, I'm going to think in terms of budget. I feel like, I'm going to have a significant budget. The guys in the Marty Called podcast do a good job when they've done their looks at each park, and they'll say, we have this many $1 million, the hundreds of millions of dollars, $1 billion, whatnot. I'm not going to really get into that because I have no idea really what things cost. I just want to be honest. I'm not going to present myself as someone who's an expert on, these upgrades will be $8 million or $50 million or whatever. Whatever I choose, I'm sure it costs more than that. So starting with the queue line, the idea of the Dino Institute is still great. We can keep, if assuming that they find a way to pay him properly, Bill Nye as the voice in there. And just generally, this is a queue from 1998, created before that. Disney has found ways to do some really cool things with the queues to Flight of Passage, Smuggler's Run, Rise of the Resistance. We need to up the ante a bit. So we're going to go through the queue, still have the basics set up, but try to find new ways to present dinosaurs and everything else. Also, when you get into the pre-show, you're in a really kind of nothing room, and then you have this little screen with Felicia Rashad and Dr. Seeker, and I would just try to find ways to enhance the area and make it really look like a Dino Institute, not a generic 90s Disney pre-show room. Now, it gets a little tricky here because I do like the pre-show, and I feel like it sets up the attraction well, so I'm not sure they need to create anything new here. I would say, if anything else, they need to remaster it, make everything seem nicer. If they want to redo it, hey, Felicia Rashad could still be in a new version, so you could still do it. You don't have to re-record everything, but maybe find some ways to at least not have it jump out at us that this is from the mid-90s. Because the idea for this is, too, we want to make changes that'll last for the long term. I'm not beholden to shareholders. I don't need to pick something that's not going to cost as much, that's going to get more profits, that then we'll have to redo it in 5 years. No, we want to make it seem timeless. So the way you do that is you don't put in some sort of, this technology's been cool for 5 minutes, let's put this in. No, we want to make something that could work in any era and really just connect with us. And it seems kind of classic. Like this Institute's always been there. Not that it's just kind of thrown together for a theme park attraction. Do the same thing with the queue after you get out. There isn't much to do there. Just find little touches to make everything not seem like it comes from a certain time period. I know that's kind of vague, but there's a lot you could do there. We could go through every step of the queue, and I'll be here for 2 hours. I'm trying not to do that. So the attraction itself, let's add a few things. Let's add some animatronics. Let's make sure that when the big Carnotaurus jumps out at you, that everything works correctly. They've done this recently. They have made some updates, but we really need to make sure everything works. Bring in a few surprises, enhance the use of effects, increase smells, maybe add a little bit of fire, smoke smell, wind, all the effects that have been around for a long time that you can do. I'm not trying to ramp up the scares. This is not me trying to add a bunch of J-bangs, if you're familiar with what that is from Universal. But I want this to feel like a modern attraction, and we got to watch out for the areas where you're just in the dark. Now, dark can be a good setup for a scare or something, but you see how well Disney really packs in the effects and the physical sets and everything into Indiana Jones Adventure. Dinosaur has always felt like it needed a bit more oomph. Let's do that there. You don't need to go crazy, but make this attraction shine. And there are ways. All the bones are there. The components are in place. Surprise us in ways we didn't expect, where the attraction feels new, even if like 90% of it is the same. That's what I would say there, including going back in time. Let's enhance those effects coming back. All the little steps you can do that don't require a giant, gut the attraction and start over. And this also holds true for the areas around the Dino Institute. Instead of having just some pathways with some basic things, let's bring in, how they've done with Pandora, where here, let's find some plant life that comes from the time period of the dinosaurs, and let's try to create it. I mean, I don't mean create an actual living plant, fake plants, but let's make this area feel like you've gone somewhere that is so out of the realm of possibility. This Dino Institute is in this area that who knows what you're going to find. And that, take your cues from Pandora, maybe add some lighting make this place a cool area to go at night, a little bit of music. There's a lot of things you can do. And I would like to see Disney look to take what is good in this area and take it to the next level with some new little touches. You can make them photo spots, whatever else. So people want to hang out over here too, and not just in some of the other areas like Africa and Pandora that are better themed. Now we're going to zoom in. The big elephant in the room when you talk about Dinoland USA is Chester and Hester's Dino-Rama. So Disney has already started the process that I was going to do by removing Primeval Whirl, because that's such an obvious deletion. It never should have been there. I understand, and we're going to have some ideas put in talking about this, that Disney went ahead and created a complicated backstory for Chester and Hester's Dino-Rama. It's kind of cute. It's kitschy. I would like to see something like this maybe in place of the bad Bugs Bunny area in my local Six Flags. There are ways to make this cool, but not at Disney's Animal Kingdom. When you have the same park that has so much beautiful areas, even Pandora, they brought that in and were able to make that look just amazing. You've got Africa and Asia and everything. And then you go into this corner and you're like, what is this? Especially if you don't know. And so I feel like this is a no-brainer. So first of all, Primeval Whirl is gone. It's been removed. That off-the-shelf coasters can sometimes work, but when they look like this in a park like Disney's Animal Kingdom, it just does not fit. So that's out of there. Second, with all apologies to the people that are making lots of money off this at Disney, the Fossil Fun games, all those carnival games, gone. I'm sorry. I know that Disney is the business. Disney needs to make a lot of money. But to me, carnival games just don't belong in a theme park. The only exception might be a Disney California Adventure. Because if you really think of the idea of Pixar Pier, but all that area over there, I can say, okay, I can see a small area over by Toy Story Mania with games. You can make the case for that. Okay, I'm all right with that. The rest of it, no. Because what it does too is it makes it set up where basically you create this backstory for Chester and Hester's and everything, and it kind of feels like an excuse to take our money with overpriced carnival games. I don't mean to be too down on it, but I don't like it. I never go in that area. I've never played a game there. We go in that corner and it's just like, oh, what is all this? Yes, I mean, the Cementosaurus is kind of cute, but even that just doesn't really fit for me in this area. So that's going to get removed too. I'm sorry. I have some fun pictures of me standing in front of it. It looks like it's on my head. Those will be nice memories. They're gone. So all that's coming out. I will say though, Triceratops spin, I'm going to keep. Now, you can say, well, Dan, wait. This looks a lot like everything else. This is tacky or whatnot. But a couple things. One, we do need things for kids to do at Disney's Animal Kingdom. We need more of them, actually. There's a case where, I remember going with when my daughter was 4, and she enjoyed the ride she did, but there's a point where she's like, where are the rides? I'm tired. They enjoyed Wilderness Explorers. I think that's amazing. I'm glad they have it. They love the animals. But sometimes people just need to go on. You go to a Disney park, they want to ride some rides. So I can see that too. And also, I feel like the issue isn't really the ride itself. The issue is the surroundings. You bring something like that, you go up in the air, you look around. If you could see some cool stuff, something that looks natural and beautiful, it would work fine. And it's also on the very edge of that section. So you have the walkway there, kind of across from the Boneyard, which I'll talk about in a minute. And you can keep it there and you're just removing everything behind it. So I think it's not like you're taking something right out of the middle and there's no way. You can add more trees, add more things that look gorgeous and not lose all the rest. Very similar for everything else. The souvenir shop, you might need some retheming, but that can stay over there too. And Restaurantosaurus, same deal. Where I feel like all those areas, yes, they fit the way it's now, but they also could be set up as kind of an oasis in an area with a lot of vegetation and everything. So I feel like you may need to make some tweaks, but those areas, those 3, Triceratops spin, the souvenir area, and then the Restaurantosaurus can all stay. So I'm not just removing everything. I'm taking out the areas that really are the worst, which to me was all the Primeval World area and the games and kind of the so much concrete. Oh, too much blacktop concrete, whatever you want to call it. Too much. It's not good. So here's what we're going to replace it with. And this is probably my biggest idea. And that is we're going to add a coaster, an RMC, Rocky Mountain Construction coaster. And it's going to go, this is not a huge area. I've got my Google Earth pulled up. There's a lot of back of house buildings and everything back there. So this is not going to be the biggest RMC ever, not on par even with Airy Force One. But if you take the entire footprint of Primeval World, then you also take out all the games and everything else. You use there is a decent amount of green space near the show building of Dinosaur. You're not removing all that, but you're kind of cutting through the trees. So essentially, this would be a steel coaster, and it would have the theme that looks a lot like the Boneyard. And I know people always talked about the idea for the excavator coaster, and I'm not really saying we're going to bring in that exact thing, but the theme is of a roller coaster that is set in an area that is, you're searching for dinosaur bones, you're going through kind of this really natural, rocky area. So, you see this with a lot of RMC coasters. Like I think about Outlaw Run, which is at Silver Dollar City, where it's basically diving through the woods and everything. And even the structure looks sort of otherworldly and everything and strange. And that's what I'm going for here. I want it to be, I don't want it to be as ugly as like Indiana Jones in Paris or something. But you want to have, RMC has shown a real ability to, like, for example, like Kentucky Kingdom with Storm Chaser, to fit a fairly small coaster and really pack a punch. This may seem weird, but I'm going to do one with no inversions. Because I feel like we want this to be, I hate the name family coaster, because I feel like sometimes calling something a family coaster, you end up with things like Primeval World, which aren't really comfortable for adults or kids, but they don't go upside down. And so I feel like this is going to be something where the height is probably not going to get above, you're 80 feet or so, for the biggest drop. But you're really going to find a way to pack a lot in. The attraction won't be super long, but it'll be longer than Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. You're not going to add audio animatronics or anything. The setting is the key. And could you imagine being in that area? You've got Dinosaur, you've got Triceratops Spin, you've got a lot of pathways and vegetation. And then to have that coaster, think of how Expedition Everest is and the way the coaster is set up there and how, every time it comes by, it just livens up the whole area, even like Seven Dwarfs Mine Train in Fantasyland. They both just liven up the area, and this is what's going to do here. And also, too, I feel like Universal has shown how adding a really cool coaster can draw an entirely different crowd of people. Yes, Universal has always gone for thrill rides, but the coaster fans is a bit different because, yes, coaster fans like the Hulk, don't really like Rip Ride Rocket, which I totally understand. But, they got rid of Dragon Challenge. Yes, they have Hagrid's, but again, it's not really a super thrill coaster. But to bring in RMC and work with them and do something that has some unique elements, is thrilling at times, but is able to be ridden by most people. So, the height requirement might be more on the 40-inch level. So above Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, maybe 44, which is the Space Mountain height requirement. But the idea is, I'm not trying to go away from what Disney does, but I think Disney really, you have Iron Gwazi coming to Busch Gardens, Tampa. So that's an RMC. Then you also have the RMC in Georgia. And then not an RMC, but you have Icebreaker coming to SeaWorld. You just had the Velocicoaster. Disney, yes, they have Guardians of the Galaxy and Tron. But again, I would like to see them do something with Animal Kingdom where then you set it up where you have the big attractions. You have Flight of Passage. You have Expedition Everest. You have Kilimanjaro Safaris. And then you have this. And I feel like, too, when this opens, Disney needs to take some time on Expedition Everest, do something about the Yeti, and really get that up to speed. And it'll be easier to close when they do that. And I don't know. I think it's a win-win. I think this area, the Animal Kingdom needs another headliner. Navi River Journey is pulling much more weight than it should. You're seeing this a bit at Epcot, where Soarin' and Test Track for a while had to pull too much weight. Frozen kind of pulled that off. But I think with Remy's and with Guardians opening, you're going to realize Soarin' and Test Track are going to settle into where they should be in terms of crowds and in terms of interest. They're both great attractions. And that's what I want to see at Animal Kingdom, where I want to see some attractions like Navi River Journey that shouldn't be, or even Cali River Rapids, that should be second tier and shouldn't have very long lines, but there's just not enough to do. So that's my big move there, is to bring in an RMC, all outdoor, well-themed, but as much using the natural landscape, natural kind of in quotes, because they're going to have to add a lot, taking out a lot of that concrete. So this coaster is not going above concrete. It's going through this, really, what the work Disney's going to have to do is on the rock work and on just the natural setting. And you don't want it to seem exactly like the Velocicoaster with the wrecks there. You want it to be more green. And you can have a theme where you're trying to explore for dinosaur bones or something like that and really sell that side of it. And of course, you're going to connect it to the Dino Institute, because basically the work you're doing that leads you on this adventure is for the Dino Institute. So you can have the queue line kind of set that up. And if you did decide with Dinosaur to ultimately replace and redo the pre-show, you could also connect that then to, actually, I really like that idea, to connecting that to this new coaster and really making it something special. I'm going to quickly talk about the Boneyard, where I feel like there's nothing terribly wrong with the Boneyard. I think, again, like some of the other areas, I know that my big announcement should not just be, hey, take what you have, Dan, and make it a little better. That's what I'm telling Disney. Just take what you have and heighten it. I've seen it with zoos and generally just with what Disney has even done with some of their other areas in the park. The Boneyard needs a refresh. It's a little uncomfortable going in there as an adult with kids screaming and everything else. It needs to be more comfortable for adults to sit and hang out at. Seriously, put a stand back there that sells beer. I'm not, it sounds weird, but make this an area where it's more of a relaxing oasis, not an area that's like a painful playground. And while the Boneyard is not on the levels of the most painful playgrounds that I've been in a theme park or amusement park, it's not the best either. So I feel like, work on making this. They've seen what they did with the entrance to Epcot. I'm not just saying add trees, but add more seating, add some, and hey, if you add a beer stand, it's probably a big moneymaker at Disney. But take the elements to make the Boneyard fun for kids and make it one of those areas where it's like, hey, what else can we do with this? Can we make scavenger hunts that people can find out? Besides Wilderness Explorers is that already, but maybe you can have some special events. Maybe you can add an area to the back where at a beer garden. I don't know. I just feel like the Boneyard has kind of fallen into that it's a playground idea. And one of the submissions is going to get into this more, and I promise I'm not stealing it. I've been thinking about it, but just the idea of making this, trying to find ways to make spaces not just do one thing. And that's what I always like about the best areas of theme parks, where it's like you go into Pandora and it has a connection to the movie for the people that are still interested. You have the thrills of Flight of Passage, the comfort of Navi River Journey, and also, though, it does another thing where it just is a really cool space to hang out. And then you have a good meal place, you have some good snacks and beers and everything else. It's just a gorgeous setting. So it's doing a lot of different things. It's providing reassurance and comfort and beauty, and also providing thrills. The Boneyard really just does one thing. How do you make it where it can do more than one thing? And that's the same thing with Triceratops Spin, where it provides something where it provides a kid's attraction, but then it also provides great views. You want it to do both, and that expands the amount of people that are interested in that attraction and makes for comfort where people around aren't going, why is this here? What, like flying carpets? No, it's a comfortable space. It does more than one thing, which kind of goes back to the original ideas of Disneyland, of the company idea from Walt Disney of parents and kids can play together, but not as simple as just, oh, they can ride a carousel together, or oh, they can ride Small World. More spaces that are comfortable for a wide range of people. And that's something I always think about when I think about ways I would like to see the parks improve. Disney has done a good job with those in some places, could do better in others. One other quick addition before we get to the final element of my ideas is no dance parties. I have no issues with having character greetings with Donald or Mickey or anyone in gear that, makes them look like they're kind of explorers or somehow connected to the Dino Institute. But I'm sorry, we don't need Donald and friends to have their bash. It again adds to that sort of feeling. And I don't mean to be like, oh, I don't like fun or characters or anything. I want this to be a really fun area. I'm just not sure just basic character dance parties totally fit the bill. Now we're going to get to the final area, which I was including the Theater of the Wild, which shows Finding Nemo the musical and is going to show the new version next year. I've included that because I feel like it doesn't really have its own home. And while you could say, well, maybe it's kind of part of Asia, there is a bridge there. So I've liked to include that as part of Dinoland. And actually, if you really look at the maps, it's not that far from the area that is going to include my new coaster. So now this is a big structure. I don't feel like it makes sense to demolish it and start over. So instead, though, I'm not going to really use it as a theater. We're going to gut out the inside, and we're going to do an indoor dark ride. Now, I feel like another thing that the Animal Kingdom is really lacking is more indoor spaces, especially indoor rides. So this is going to be more in the vein of Navi River Journey. And I don't just mean, it's not related to Pandora or anything, but it's also going to pertain to dinosaurs and life from that time period. But it's going to be slow moving. If possible, it may be a boat ride. That's what I would like to see. Now, is there infrastructure in cutting out a theater and adding a moat and doing all that? I'm not sure. But in my world, this is going to be a shorter boat ride, which is mostly kind of laid back. You can see there's a lot of like parking behind there and stuff. I think some of that could be shifted and we could expand this with like an extra extension for the show building and create the reason I mentioned Navi River Journey, it's kind of atmospheric. It has some animatronics, some screens in the background, and just creates a really nice environment, but Near the end, there is a bit of a thrill, kind of in the vein of the drop on Pirates of the Caribbean, where you're on a boat ride, it seems leisurely the whole time, and then it kind of picks up speed at the end. You get a little nervous, but nothing that most anyone couldn't do. Just add a few little thrills in, maybe a little water splash, but not getting you soaked. Just something to add a bit more life to it. This will have a great soundtrack with music and with atmospherics and just showcasing the best that Disney can do, not connected to any property or IP, and just adding another attraction to the park. Because that's kind of what I want to do here, where if you really think about the number of attractions at Disney's Animal Kingdom, there just aren't enough things. There are shows, but not enough rides. And I don't feel like we really need two shows that are full-on live spectaculars. You have Festival of the Lion King, that can stay over there. And you also have what needs to be retooled, but you do have the bird show featuring the characters from Up over there in the Asia section. I don't feel like we need another show here. So I would rather use the space and completely change it. And then what we're essentially doing then is we're just adding, I've already added a coaster. I know that they recently removed Primeval Whirl, so you're kind of evening out. But you have a situation then where you, in terms of rides, you have Dinosaur, the new coaster, Triceratops Spin, and this new dark ride. 4 right there. And then Everest makes a 5th right there. Cali River Rapids is 6. Kilimanjaro Safari 7. You have the 2 Pandora attractions. That's 8, 9. And you're kind of getting where even a park that's not totally geared towards rides should not have as few as it has. So you're kind of heading in the right direction, at least. And of course, if you really want to add, you could add the train to Conservation Station as a 10th ride. And I may be forgetting something. And of course, you have the show. It's tough to be a bug. But you get the idea where we're starting to fill out the park a bit. And I would suspect this boat ride would probably not be super long given the size. But I'd like to shoot more for about like 6 or 7 minutes. Not the typical Disney 3 to 4 minutes that we've been seeing lately. The coaster that I put in is probably more around the like 2.5 or so. But this one I like to inch more towards the 6, 7, 8 minute range, more like the length of like Little Mermaid versus us going more into the Navi River Journey type 4 minutes, which feels too short for that. So that's where I'm heading for that one. And overall, I think before I get to all of your ideas is I just want this land to fit comfortably within the rest of Disney's Animal Kingdom. So, ideas can vary whether this roller coaster is more thrilling, less thrilling, whether we decide to do a show instead of the dark ride in where Finding Nemo is, and whatever we do with Dinosaur and everything. I just want this area to be at the same high level as Harambe and as Pandora and as a lot of Asia, and to really make it out to be something special that we want to spend time in and that fits with just how cool this park is. And that's the thing. It's not that I'm against characters in any form or that I'm against IP being part of it. Pandora, totally IP. But I feel like this park is too good to go the lamer route or to go basic, even with this 50s roadside attraction. It just feels beneath this park. Like if I look at like Toy Story Land at Disney's Hollywood Studios, not that much better in terms of how it's set up, but seems to fit a bit more. I'm not saying it's my favorite land, but doesn't feel as out of place in Hollywood Studios, where this area, it really stands out. So I just want Dinoland to be on par with the things I enjoy in the rest of Disney's Animal Kingdom. And that's where my ideas are really geared overall. And I just want to be a cool place that we all really enjoy and want to spend more time in, which I don't believe is the case right now. All right, well, now I'm going to hand it over to some former podcast guests who really know their stuff and also talk about some of your submissions for how to improve Dinoland USA. This is the fun part. You had to listen to me ramble for a half hour, and now we get to the exciting part. Let's start with the short one. This is from Carly Wiesel, who is the host of the very amusing podcast. Also, journalist, writes for a lot of different publications. She's all over social media. Been a guest twice on the Tomorrow Society podcast, and she has a cool idea about what we need to do to, hey, we got the Boneyard. What about adults? So here is Carly Wiesel.
Dan, it's Carly. Thank you so much for thinking of me for this episode. To be honest, I don't have that many opinions about Dinoland USA. It's just somewhere I breeze through because Dinosaur is not my favorite ride, to put it plainly. I am scared to death of it. I do not like things popping out of dark places, and I learned that going on Dinosaur for the first time. So it's somewhere I already don't spend much time at, but the one thing I would love is that I would love kind of an adult playground where you can slide down the back of a dinosaur, basically like an activity area that kids would run around in, but for adults. I don't know if that makes much sense, but I would just love to let loose and run around and go on a slide and go on monkey bars that don't make me feel like I'm stealing an opportunity from a child. Just really have a bunch of fun because that area is so lighthearted and whimsical, and just let us do an activity. You know what I mean? I'm sure other people have much better ideas, but beyond turning the lights on in Dinosaur, that's the best I got.
This is sort of similar to what I was talking about in terms of having a bar at the Boneyard, but taken to the next degree, where it does seem like when you're in that area that, understandably so, geared towards kids. But I like the idea that Carly has of having, an extension onto that or something totally separate that is more for adults to kind of play around in. And you think about at Shanghai Disneyland, where they have those trails that, from what I've heard, are very treacherous in a way. They seem that way. And I'm not saying maybe it would go on this level, but something that basically would allow adults to enjoy the park. And I'm for this in a lot of ways, because I feel like, again, like I just mentioned, you don't just want the areas to feel just geared towards a certain clientele. And that's where Disney's always been so good about having different attractions and areas that people can enjoy of any age and any interest level. But some people do want to go in and play around and have fun. And now, granted, if you put a playground there, then use my idea of a bar, which Carly didn't put in, that could get dangerous too. So you have to be a little wary there. But I just like the idea of thinking of the parks as playgrounds for adults, not just as for kids, or, the adults have their areas and the kids have their areas. You can kind of find a way to make it both. And that's what I think is cool about this idea. Thumbs up to Carly for this one. Next up, we've got Brett Knackman of the Notably Disney podcast. Brett does some awesome interviews with composers, other artists, authors, so many cool people. If you like this podcast, I think you should definitely check out Brett's show. I've been on it a few times. Just recorded a trivia show, which should be out very soon, where I prove that I don't know that much. That's all I will say as a spoiler. Brett has some cool ideas here about a pretty big re-theme to Dinoland. So take it away, Brett.
Hey Dan, it's Brett Knackman from the Notably Disney podcast. I was really excited to offer some ideas on how to transform Dinoland USA. My thoughts? Well, redesign the whole land and make it a South American themed experience. Again, to align with the notion of Asia and Africa, which are big sections of the park. What to include? Well, you could redesign Dinosaur to be Indiana Jones Adventure out at Disneyland. You could maintain it as Dinosaur and add some architectural features on the outside that kind of give more of a South American feel, perhaps with some stone, or it could maybe resemble a temple of some sort. Maybe you'd have to carry that influence into the actual attraction. Maybe even change the attraction to focus on a current global issue, climate crisis, and it could be an expedition to track down individuals who are aiming to burn the Brazilian rainforest. And there would be that social commentary that I think would be really very tethered to the general theme of Disney's Animal Kingdom, which is preserving the beautiful world that we encompass. For Theater in the Wild, sorry, Finding Nemo, you're going to have to swim away, and instead we're going to bring in Encanto, the new musical from Disney Feature Animation, or Walt Disney Animation Studios, I should say. For the Boneyard, you could keep it as is. You could perhaps give it an Indiana Jones theme once again. Certainly you can tell I want to see some indie here. In Dino-Rama, I would maybe allocate a big section of there and expand that to be an indoor attraction that would be themed around the Emperor's New Groove. It could be a roller coaster to kind of join Yzma and Kronk on that famous underground lair that she has. That would be fun. I also think there's an opportunity to bring in an education component through an immersive, interactive animal experience exhibit of sorts that would feature some creatures that you would traditionally find in that region of the world, perhaps jaguars, iguanas, and the list can go on. And I think some eateries would be well needed and have some traditional Venezuelan food, maybe some arepas. I would be really thrilled to inhabit and walk around this South American land. It would be obviously a very costly effort, and I would encourage Disney to develop it in phases, but that would be my idea. Thanks, Dan.
Well, first of all, Brett, we can't do phases because what happens when you have a phase is phase 2 never comes. Like, when are we going to see an e-ticket in Adventures Campus? I don't know. But in all seriousness, I like the idea, and South America is another way to go because, well, obviously you've got the Amazon and the rainforest, and there's so many, and I just generalized South America really badly there, but there's just so much there, and it would fit very well with, like Brett says, you have Africa and Asia. Why not make this South American themed? Now, looking at more specifics that he brings up, it's interesting how Brett really kind of brings in some IP which would fit with how Disney typically does things. And Indiana Jones is one we've heard so many times about possibly Indiana Jones being brought in as some sort of roller coaster or other attraction being put into the Dinoland USA area. I don't hate it. I mean, I like Indiana Jones. I like those movies. Indiana Jones Adventure is one of the coolest attractions around. I don't love the idea of putting it in for Dinosaur because I like having different types of attractions on both coasts. But I'm not opposed to Indiana Jones being a part of Disney's Animal Kingdom, especially if you're going to bring in characters. At least that keeps this sort of a more real life. I mean, relatively speaking, it is Indiana Jones and everything. But it's not as like bringing in just characters that are not connected to that. And of course, he did mention Emperor's New Groove, which I know was loved by many. I enjoyed the movie. I actually saw it fairly recently, but I like what he brings up about an education component. I also think adding another dark ride, kind of like what I was talking about with the Nemo Theater, is a cool idea. And what I appreciate about all of this is Brett, while moving away from Dinoland, is trying to find something that replaces it that also fits within Animal Kingdom and is, better fit than maybe what's there right now, which is always a big step forward in terms of what we want Disney to do with the area. Thanks so much, Brad. I thought those were awesome ideas. And all of you should check out Notably Disney. It's a really cool podcast. Now I'm going to read you something from a listener who sent an email, who is Chris Goyne, and he says, I think I would basically level the area. In its place, I would build a berm or rock wall around the perimeter with a tunnel equipped with special effects designed to take you back in time to the Cretaceous period. The entire land would be in dino time, would be themed to a scientific observation outpost surrounded by fencing. We could have a gentler river ride with sauropods and hadrosaurs and a thrill ride with tyrannosaurs, etc. Maybe an elevated restaurant overlooking the sauropod lagoon and a baby triceratops petting zoo / feeding station. Dinosaur facts everywhere you look. Maybe call it Cretaceous Outpost. What do you think? That is Chris's question. I like it. I think it's interesting, the idea that you would level it and then still go with the dinosaur theme, because I think a lot of people might look at it as, okay, we're going to go ahead and remove the dinosaur theme, which doesn't really fit, but then we're going to do kind of like Brett did with South America. But what I enjoy about this is Chris is making a land, like by starting from scratch, what you're doing is you're allowing the land to fit thematically across the board. Because right now you have this section where the Boneyard is kind of one area, and then you have Chester and Hester's is different, and then the Dinoland area is different. It's all these kind of incongruent parts that don't really fit together, where by starting over, like Chris is saying, you can have everything fit together and call it something like Cretaceous Outpost. And what I really enjoy too, they do this a little bit with Galaxy's Edge, but I think they could do better, is the idea of the transition, where you're like, you have to go through a tunnel with special effects in order to get there. And I think that's a great idea. Like you think about Universal with how you get to Diagon Alley, where it's a separate area. That's really important because it can be very jarring to be in one area that's completely different. Like I mentioned with Chester and Hester's, you're over by Everest and you look at this majestic mountain and you turn a corner, you walk a bit and you're like, whoa, whoa. And I think this really solves that. What Chris is doing there is it would take a big investment. You've seen how much it costs from Disney to create a new land basically from scratch. But I think you could really, doing this would be a lot easier even than my ideas to make it all fit together in the park and not have these just all these separate areas that don't really fit together. I really like the idea, Chris. Good job, and I appreciate you sending your ideas. And I also received some ideas from a recent podcast guest, Lauren Staniszewski, who was on episode 151, where we talked about her visits to Walt Disney World and the Animal Kingdom Lodge over the summer of this year. Here's her ideas, which are similar to Brett's, but still feel different. And that's what I like how some of the crossover you're seeing from various ideas, and then some differences where everyone has their own spin on it. Here's Lauren. One of the areas I've always wished Animal Kingdom would explore would be the rainforest. There is so much life in the rainforest between animals, plants, ecosystem, lots of materials and potential. It would tie in very nicely with the philosophy of conservation and preservation that Animal Kingdom was built on as well. And South America is a largely underrepresented area in Walt Disney World to boot. Perhaps the whole Dinoland USA area could be rethemed to a South America area, fitting with the Africa and Asia areas elsewhere in the park, and explore the animals, habitats, and cultures from that area of the world. Amazon River seems like an obvious inspiration for a ride, but maybe retheming Dinosaur into a sort of hunt/rescue mission for an endangered animal or medicinal plant might also work. Would love to have food from that area of the world as well. Nice. I like that two different people came in, both coming up with South America. But what I appreciate too is that Lauren's taking a bit of a different approach from Brett. I find it interesting that both of them are talking about, Brett talked about, you're trying to protect the area, and then Lauren talks about a hunt rescue mission. It reminds me of Kilimanjaro Safaris and the Big Little Red original storyline, which is all gone now. Oh, that's too bad. But that idea still permeates in things like Kelly River Rapids and other areas of the park. So I would appreciate seeing it more in this area because that obviously it's not big in Dinoland where there aren't a lot of sections saying how we need to preserve the dinosaurs, of course. So it's good that if we did retheme this completely, that you could have attractions that fit with the overall mission of conservation for the park. Love the idea of the Amazon River. I think you could have in a completely separate attraction even while keeping Dinosaur and maybe resetting it up a little bit like Lauren says, but you could even do a second attraction where Primeval World was or in that whole Chester and Hester's area and make it kind of the Amazon River and a lot of that and do it indoors, I think would be better so you could really control all elements of it. And it wouldn't just, again, you want it to feel different than the Jungle Cruise too. But there's a lot of things you could do there, and I really appreciate where Lauren is going from this. And our podcast was really fun, and I'm glad to have the submission and be able to talk about some fun ideas. It's kind of, once these come in, I start thinking about all these other areas, and I've got to kind of rein myself in and get back to so many cool ideas from a lot of you here for this show. And now I want to get to Courtney and Emily of the Book of the Mouse Club podcast. They do such great work. They have interviews with authors, they review books, they have a lot of fun episodes and really dig into books about Disney and the parks and the movies and so much more. And what I really like about this is they recorded something together. And we're almost getting like a mini podcast from Courtney and Emily, and they have a bunch of cool ideas. So I will now hand it over to Courtney and Emily of the Book of the Mouse Club podcast. Here are their ideas for Dinoland USA.
Hi, Dan. It's Courtney.
And this is Emily.
From Book of the Mouse Club podcast. Thank you so much for reaching out to us to hear our ideas on actually one of our favorite areas of Disney's Animal Kingdom, and that's Dinoland. So Emily and I we made sure for listeners who have heard our own podcast, sometimes we are on the same thinking line, but we wanted to have two distinct different ideas to bring to you today. So I will let Emily go first because I absolutely love her idea.
So what's really fun about Dinoland USA is its backstory, and I know as theme park fans, we love diving into the backstories of attractions. And Dinoland USA has such a great backstory of Chester and Hester building their roadside attraction off their gas station because of the Dino Institute. It's also just full of that Americana entrepreneurship ideas. But unfortunately, I don't think a lot of fans are really familiar with that backstory. But once you know it, you see it everywhere. So I don't want to change the land. I want the backstory to come through by adding streetmosphere. I love that we've added the characters. Donald has his party in Dinoland and all the characters come out. But I think if we just add Chester and Hester, kind of like how we had the Citizens of Hollywood, but have a Chester and Hester sharing their story, welcoming guests to Dinoland USA. I think the backstory and all the details that are already in Dinoland USA will just come to life just by hearing them share their story about their gas station, their roadside attraction, and encouraging people to support Dino Institute.
I loved that idea of roaming characters. I think some of my favorite interactions in the park are those that are improved between, interactions with, like you said, the citizens of Hollywood, of the citizens of Main Street. So breathing that life into a brand new park, meaning like where it wasn't previously seen before at Disney's Animal Kingdom, would be a lot of fun. It'd be cool to maybe get like Dr. Seeker.
Right. Like, what if we bring out those characters also from Dino Institute? Because I'm sure they talk to Chester and Hester. They stop at the gas station and Restaurantosaurus to get some lunch on their breaks.
Well, and a big part of the lore, too, that I've noticed, if you ever read the pamphlets in Restaurantosaurus, is that like the interns of the Dino Institute have run amok. And I think as former Disney College Program participants, both of us, where we can kind of picture the fun that they were having. So it'd be cool to have maybe just like a quirky intern, just more to build and lean into that lore. So I really loved your idea there, Emily. I was thinking, if we were to get rid of Chester and Hester's Dino-Rama, I still think that Dinoland would be integral to the park. I know some people might bring up like changing it to something else, but maybe it's the nostalgia for me. I visited Disney's Animal Kingdom the year that it opened, and the park had a lot of growing to do. So I was about 6 years old at the time, and Dinoland was my favorite. Aside from the safari, I was like, I love the Boneyard. I love playing here. So I wanted to throw back and dig up, no pun intended, an older idea from Imagineering that was supposed to be part of Phase 2. We had the pleasure of interviewing author Christopher Smith for his book, The Walt Disney World That Never Was. And this was an idea that I actually had not heard of until I read the book, which is sometimes a rare find for me. And that is the idea of the Excavator, which was an unbuilt wooden roller coaster attraction for Dinoland USA at Disney's Animal Kingdom. So originally, I'm pulling this information from the Disney Fandom Wiki. They had shared that Disney's Animal Kingdom's development Dinoland was to be anchored by 2 thrill attractions, Countdown to Extinction, which is of course now the Dinosaur attraction, and a wooden roller coaster called the Excavator. So here's a little bit about the story. Quote, the Excavator was to be an extension of the Boneyard's playground setting, being the rickety remains of an ore car track left over from when the Boneyard was ordinary gravel quarry before the fossil discoveries. And since then, some of the Dino Institute's interns have decided to turn the ore car system into a ride to amuse themselves and the visitors, as well as to put the ore cars back into service to transport fossil specimens. Guests would pass by numerous ignored old signs warning about the stability of the ore car system before arriving at load. While moving along the track, guests would pass through rib cages of dinosaur skeletons and zoom past mechanical dinosaur sculptures built by the students from old construction equipment and junk, end quote. So a little bit of a Big Thunder vibe there maybe. And you might say, oh, well, Expedition Everest is right there and the park has its coaster. To which I raise you, Disney's Hollywood Studios has both Slinky Dog Dash and Rock and Roller Coaster. So you can absolutely have 2 roller coasters in the park.
And I think we don't have to get rid of Chester and Hester. What if we still have that? Because you said the lore includes an intern. So what if we combine our 2 ideas? You have Chester and Hester, you have the interns all part of Streetmosphere, and all of these just come together.
Okay, I was just thinking of the footprint of where it would go.
If we have
infinite
all of the land to build what we want.
Sure. I would love to keep Chester and Hester's, but if we had to get rid of it, I think that would tie nicely to the Boneyard, because I'm not giving up the Boneyard. I do not have kids of my own, but having been a former child at one point in my life, I loved the Boneyard, and I have been to the park with friends who have young kids, and that is a great area that kids can blow off steam. So we want to keep that accessible for the youngings.
Kinesthetics of the park, like kids moving and exploration. I think also the edutainment part of archaeology and finding dinosaurs. And dinosaurs are so cool. And like, you can't get rid of the dinosaur part of Animal Kingdom, because for a lot of us as kids, dinosaurs is kind of your intro to exploring the greater animal kingdom. And what's so fantastical than something that actually did exist that we can now dream about?
Yeah, I really like that. And I think this could be a good family coaster to distinguish it from Expedition Everest, much in the way that Slinky Dog Dash is still somewhat thrilling, but is accessible to families over at Disney's Hollywood Studios. So now that Primeval World is extinct, again, no pun intended, this would be a nice replacement for that. So I think we are both in a consensus that we are keeping Dinoland as fans of that, but there's new ways to bring back life into it.
And thanks, Dan, for having us. Looking forward to hearing everyone else's ideas.
Just want to give a big thanks to Courtney and Emily for such detailed info and ideas. And it's interesting because personally, my thought right away was, yes, it's pretty obvious, but let's get rid of Chester and Hester's because it doesn't really fit with the rest of the park. But I appreciate it when people kind of take a different thought, and where Emily was going, where instead of just saying, hey, this doesn't work, let's get rid of it, kind of leaning further into it and bringing in the streetmosphere. And I mean, come on. I would love if Disney had more live actors. They've cut back so much, partially due to COVID, but I'm concerned that that's not going to ramp back up as much in the future. So I would love to see them really dive into that, because you've seen spaces where the cast members or actors can do so much to liven up an area. And I think this would be a perfect example where you have these characters. Like, I love the idea of Dr. Seeker coming out there and say, hey, we need you to come, and it's totally safe. We're just going to send you in time. It's way before, really, in a way, almost advertising for the attraction. And they could do that too. So while I still don't love the carnival games and everything, I'm totally on board with, even if we got rid of the, that whole area there, having more characters connected to the attractions kind of wandering, which I think is just an awesome idea and really inspired. And it looked like Courtney was kind of getting very close to what I was talking about there with pulling up the excavator. I know she mentioned it was a wooden coaster, but a lot of the ideas, I think we're both thinking similarly. And definitely you can have more than one coaster in the park. I mean, you think about the Magic Kingdom with Big Thunder and Space Mountain and Seven Dwarfs Mine Train and the Barnstormer. So there's, you can obviously have multiple big coasters in a park, even nearby each other, because that's how you spread out the crowds. That's where I hate to say it, take the burden off of Genie Plus and everything else, or Lightning Lane, and really create multiple places where when the park opens in the morning, people go, now wait, do I want to run to Flight of Passage, or do I want to run to this new coaster, or where do I want to go? That's always a positive. And I love the idea of just adding another big e-ticket, and then you have this land around it with Dinosaur, with the Boneyard that's already in place. So I think you could really extend off of the Boneyard in a very interesting way. I also enjoyed Courtney's former child. So that's what I started thinking about. Well, I was once a child, though I admit I was much older than 6 when I went in 1998. But as a former child, I'm going to view the Boneyard as still being something that you can enjoy. But overall, I think these are really great ideas, especially the idea of having characters who could wander into Restaurantosaurus, who could just kind of mosey around and, not make such a big thing about it. And you don't have to, it's not like you set up a character greeting or something. They're just kind of there, and people would really catch on. And this is something that would, Disney's always all about Instagram and YouTube and everything else. Let's find something that people are going to seek out. And again, I mentioned earlier that I want it to be a place you can hang out in that's fun to hang out in. That's something I want for my theme parks, especially after being at home so much with COVID and everything else during the pandemic, just, being quarantined. When you go to a place, you want it to feel alive. You don't want it to feel dead. And that's something where they could do some changes that really make these areas feel more alive and more like, I hate to use the word immersive. I think it's really overused, but you get the idea. Idea is just comforting places where even if you're not going on the rides or you don't love coasters, you still have a good time. So I like that idea, and I think it fits with kind of my overall view on what Disney needs to do with Dinoland USA. Next up is some thoughts from Ryan Ritchie, who has been a guest on the Tomorrow Society podcast twice. He directed the movie After the Fair about the 1964 World's Fair in New York City, and is also now hosting the new theme park trivia show, which is on YouTube and is super fun. It's had 3 episodes as of this recording, including one with the Crawford brothers, who do the Progress City USA podcast and other things. That's really cool. Another podcast guest, Michael Crawford. It all comes together in some way. But Ryan has some cool ideas that he sent me over email about Dinoland. Here is what Ryan had to say. I'm not the first to suggest this, but how about an Australian themed section, but finding a way to keep the Dino Institute? I don't think a lot of guests really get the connection between the two to begin with. Or really lean into the kitsch and make it more over-the-top roadside attraction feeling with the ridiculous Dino mini golf, some sort of boulder climb, maybe an electric version of the Tomorrowland Speedway, but with little off-road vehicles, and plenty of dinosaur puns along the way. As much as I appreciate the backstory for Chester and Hester, maybe this is one place where IP could be useful. If this was, say, Fozzie Bear's Dinoland USA, then that would help connect the intentional kitsch rather than reading as cheap to many guests. I want to briefly mention Australia, I think, is a great idea. I know there is another plot of land, I think closer to Asia, where they have talked about putting in Australia. I mean, talked about it years ago. It hasn't been brought up recently, at least from what we know, but also where that could fit. And then you could do South America here. But I think, it's kind of a no-brainer, given all the different wildlife in Australia and what they could do with just the outback and everything there, that it would fit really nicely. But I want to really dive more into Ryan's other thoughts about, okay, Chester and Hester went to a certain point, but we got to go much further. And that's where I think, for me, I'd kind of go, really? That's what we want to do? But if they're going to do it, go all out, I guess. No half measures, Disney. Let's go full in here. And some of the things. Now, I would hope that like the mini golf and boulder climb would not be upcharges. So I am entering this with the idea that all the attractions would not be upcharges and that the games would still be gone. And that this would be a theme park land. And bringing Fozzie is really funny to me because Fozzie as the failed stand-up comedian, which is something that I always really appreciated, like from the first Muppet movie, and it's been elsewhere, of course, but that part of Fozzie, and of course being heckled by Stetler and Waldorf, like in Muppet Vision 3D, where he's like, "Oh no, you guys, what could you do there?" It's fun. Again, I don't know if it'd be my choice, but I do agree with Ryan that if you're going to go for that, really go for it. Make it the best themed, weird, strange roadside attraction that anyone's ever seen. One that you would never actually see that goes beyond that. And that's where I think Ryan does a good job of introducing that. Because really, if you're going to do that, don't just do a little bit. Go to the fullest degree. Okay, one more listener submission. We do still have some more podcast guests here at the end, so don't worry about that. But this is a listener submission that came through Facebook by Richard Hebel. Here is my idea. I would do a retheme of the current land instead of a teardown. The theme would be guests entering a new/unknown world. The land or world would be designed to be much more realistic than the current theme they have now. I would start by revising the entrance. I would have guests enter the world through a cave in a large mountain, possibly with a large waterfall. This would help separate sight lines and make this feel like a new, different world. Inside the cave would be transportation similar to Rise of the Resistance that would transport guests to the new world. Once in the new world, guests would be entertained by what they didn't see, such as trees moving through the woods and dino sounds. In the main area, there'd be several buildings with information on dinosaurs and the new world. The information buildings would have a setup similar to the Epcot preview building, also adding in the dangers of dinosaurs in a sarcastic, lighthearted way. Dinosaur would get a slight theme change and be turned into the Dino Tour. It would be an attraction that is a ride in the new world that would take guests around to see dinosaurs while being stalked by a T-Rex. Guests would barely make it off the tour, might be scary for little kids, and being chased most of the ride. I would next add an indoor roller coaster attraction that gave a tour of how T-Rexes are raised, starting with small baby dinosaurs and their caretaker animatronic scientists that explain the experience. It would then build up to going into the faster portion of the coaster that went through the large T-Rex enclosure. The last attraction would be a large theater that would have a dino show, similar to a show with seals at smaller theme parks, but have trainers with robotic dinosaurs. This would have a fun, sarcastic theme instead of scary. I would also add several kid-friendly attractions such as flying dinosaurs such as pterodactyls, similar to Dumbo but more realistic. Of course, friendly looking for kids. Wow, there's a lot to cover here, Richard, but I will do my best to address each one. The retheming and entering a new unknown world, Chris brought that up earlier, and I still really like the idea of setting up the entrance where you're going through a cave into a large mountain, which almost makes me think that this is going to be completely indoors in a way, which, wow, that is something. And it would be very different, obviously, than the setup that you have in the Animal Kingdom, though it could be a case where you're kind of going indoors and then eventually you're able to get back outside. And one way to do that, Richard talks about his transportation like Rise of the Resistance. You get in there, you come out, you're actually outside again, and you're supposed to be in a new world, but really, it's all simulated. You aren't really that far away. So I think that's an interesting idea. He's keeping Dinosaur in there, calling it Dino Tour. He says, you're being stalked by a T-Rex, where that, of course, does feel like it could be very similar. I mean, I know it's a Carnotaurus, but you could make some tweaks there, or you could still use what you have. I think that's good. A good way to kind of keep it similar but new. Now, he's also adding an indoor roller coaster. Now, I assume, trying to kind of think of it in terms of how everything is set up, that you would probably put that transportation attraction where Triceratops Spin is right now, kind of close that all in, and then have the indoor roller coaster more where Primeval Whirl is. Now, you're getting a little bit into a space crunch here, but in theory, I like the idea of doing a roller coaster there. Like I mentioned, I wanted to do a roller coaster. I wasn't thinking indoors, but you could do it right there. Now the question is, would you keep the Boneyard or would that be removed too? And then he also wants a large theater with the Dino Show. Now, I'm assuming that would fit where we have Finding Nemo right now, but he's talking about similar to Seals. That's an interesting idea. Because, that's some serious high-tech animatronics to have it be believable. You have trainers with dinosaurs. But, there are we've seen it with some of the animatronics, like even with what they did with the Spider-Man recently at Avengers Campus. Some of the other changes that it could be done. But wow, that would be a challenge. And then his final thing, he describes kid-friendly attractions and flying dinosaurs like pterodactyls. That feels familiar. Well, if they did that one, hopefully it would have much better capacity than the one at Islands of Adventure. But, of course, I'm always a fan of doing kids' attractions. Overall, what I really like is the ambition from Richard. There's a lot here. This would be a huge, huge setup. Struggling a little bit to picture how it would all go together, but I think if you think of the idea of you're just removing all of Chester and Hester's, which he doesn't say, but I'm assuming, removing Primeval Whirl completely, which has happened, removing Triceratops Spin, removing the Boneyard, maybe you have so much space where you could totally do that. You kind of incorporate Restaurantosaurus within it, you incorporate Dinosaur in there, and that would be something. I would love to visit this place. It reminds me a little bit of like the Little Mermaid setup in Tokyo Disney Sea with the indoors, but then there's all these different attractions and such, and or something like the indoor Warner Brothers World at Abu Dhabi, which is like an entire park, but some of those areas and how they were able to use that. So, Richard, I like the ambition, and I hope that they would do something even close to the scale of this. It would be pretty awesome. All right, well, our final segment, it's a long one, is all three of the hosts of the Marty Called podcast submitted ideas, And I'm really excited to present all of them to you and to talk about them. Of course, this is Josh, Tim, and Skipper Ben. They do a really cool show. If you like this kind of show where we're kind of doing armchair Imagineering about a various land, they do this often on Marty Called and in much more detail even than what I'm doing here. So if you like this type of show, it's totally up your alley. You should listen to their podcast. They also talk about the latest news and are really candid with their thoughts about it and are big fans of Epcot, especially Josh. So I'm glad that they're all able to participate because I think their show is really cool. We're going to start with Mr. Josh Fenton, the Sultan of Saki, and he has some ideas about making some changes to Dinoland, and I think they're great, and I will play them now and then come back and talk about them. Here you go. Here is Josh Fenton.
Hey Dan, this is Sultan of Saki from the Marty Called podcast. I appreciate you giving me the chance to share my thoughts about what might be done at Dinoland or Dinoland, whatever we want to call it, at Animal Kingdom. And for anyone who's listened to our show, they probably won't be too surprised that my main concern with that whole area is that in an attempt to make it better, that they don't actually make it worse. One of the things that always scares me when I hear Imagineering coming into an area after the park has been built is that they're going to attempt to make one small discrete attraction at the expense of destroying the aesthetic of the land that it's in. So that's always my concern, and I think we can see how bad that can get when you look over at Epcot, which used to be another place-making park that was as much about walking around in and experiencing an environment as it was about, riding a lot of attractions. I will say that certainly the Chester and Hester area is kind of a disaster. Even if you buy into the sort of thinly veiled backstory that they made that area look cheap on purpose, I'm not sure that it makes a lot of sense. And quite frankly, I don't think that the overwhelming majority of guests have ever even heard that. I think it's just sort of like you stumbled out of a beautiful theme park into a crappy little area. It's always been just jarringly bad, in my opinion. It's always been ironic to me that the motive or the impetus for building Walt Disney World was that Walt didn't want the cheap kitschiness that popped up around Disneyland to infringe upon the borders of the park. And then at Animal Kingdom, they built one of the most beautiful parks they've ever made and then essentially put that kitsch in there on purpose. So it's a little bit of a head scratcher. So I guess the question is, what do you put there? Again, I think I would double down on the dinosaur theming of the land as a whole, and I would put a family ride that doesn't have a height requirement in that space, something that's maybe a boat ride, maybe some sort of land vehicle. But I think there's opportunity to do that now with Universe of Energy being gone at Epcot. Dinosaurs have been a part of Walt's storytelling since the beginning, since the railroad at Disneyland. So there's sort of precedent to have that present. I don't think the dinosaur attraction that's there now really fits that bill very well, but it's certainly a thrilling attraction that stands up. So if you could make a counterpart to that appeals to the whole family, I think that would be a great idea. And another thing that I would love to see there, it's actually one of my favorite things in all the parks when you occasionally see them, are dining venues, sit-down dining that has a view into an attraction. I absolutely love that. It's, to me, kind of a way that Disney can generate revenue by giving a little bit of a backstage experience, by giving guests sort of a voyeuristic view into an attraction while they consume overpriced food. It's perfectly on brand for the company. So I would love to see that. As far as what the details of that attraction would be, we have to leave that to people who are more creatively talented than me, which is pretty much anyone on the planet. But that's sort of what I would do, which is show a lot of restraint, not risk jeopardizing the aesthetic of the land as a whole, fix the thing that's obviously broken, add a higher-end dining experience there that can consume 45 minutes to an hour of guest time, especially at night. That might be something, if they have a good dinner offering, that can keep people in that park after the sun goes down, which is something they've been trying to do since the beginning. But those are basically all the ideas that I have, and if you like them, I appreciate that. Again, I'm the Sultan of Saki. If you didn't like them, then I am the real Skipper Ben. Again, I want to thank you for giving me a chance to share my thoughts, and I hope that you and your listeners have a great holiday season. Bye-bye.
Okay, well, I liked several of those ideas from Josh. And I think he brings up a good point, too, because we're all talking about these amazing, great changes. We're going to gut the thing. We're going to make everything. And we do have to be careful where there are parts of it that I think are cool. And I've mentioned that with Dinosaur and with some of the lands around there, that there are segments where you don't want to go the That's a good point that we haven't really talked about so far. He's similar to me in wanting to take out the Chester and Hester's area and even agreeing with people that like it, that a lot of the guests don't really understand it. And I do like the idea of having an attraction without a height requirement, similar to my idea that I was going to put into the Finding Nemo Theater, where you have a family attraction that's focused on dinosaurs. And Josh also brought up the history with dinosaurs and Walt Disney, going back to the train at Disneyland and also the 1964 World's Fair. And I think that's important to remember because you can look at it and then you're always comparing it to what's going on with Jurassic Park and Universal. But there is more of a history through Universe of Energy and some of those other attractions that we would like to keep that, and I think is good for Disney parks if done well. And another thing that I like is the sit-down dinner, because I feel like, you look at the Animal Kingdom and you do have Tiffin's and you have Yak and Yeti, but on the other kind of side of the park over there, you have Flame Tree Barbecue in the middle and then Restaurantosaurus, but you don't really have a good restaurant. Yes, there's Pizza Fare too, but you don't have a sit-down place that can kind of anchor that side in. And that's something I was thinking about too, is how can we find a way to make people want to stay in the park later and hang out in this area later, and having a really good restaurant and the views into the attraction, totally cool. I like the idea. I like the rotating restaurant that you can see into Living with the Land, and also Pinocchio Village House. You can see It's a Small World, though that restaurant has always been mobbed when I've been there, so I haven't actually seen it. But that's a cool idea, and also thinks about ways that you're not just adding a ride, you're finding updates that make it a more enjoyable park for a lot of different people, and I think that restaurant and offering a cool experience would definitely do that. So thank you, Josh. These are all great ideas. Now, speaking of great ideas, we're going to move on to Tim Grassi. Tim has been on this show a bunch of times, probably more than anyone really would want. But he was also on recently to talk about what's been going on lately with Disney, with changes, Lightning Lane, a lot of different things. And he is back here to give his ideas. And I told everyone, try to keep this, a few minutes or so. Tim kind of blew that out of the water, but I think he has some cool ideas. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tim Grassi of the Marty Called Podcast. Here you go, Tim.
Hey everybody, Tim Grassi here from the Marty Called Podcast. We actually did an Animal Kingdom build-out show not too long ago, a couple months ago, episode 40 of our show. And on that, I discussed my plans for the area. I believe we all wanted to just level it, set it on fire, let it go away. But a distinction certainly needs to be made that Dinosaur, the attraction similar to Indiana Jones Adventure, that can absolutely stay. There's nothing really wrong with that. It really is just Chester and Hester's Dino-Rama. I also look at it as the area around the Finding Nemo the Musical Theater as well, the theater in the wild, that can also go, and that creates a rather large footprint. So our show did a build out of all of the Animal Kingdom, and I'm going to kind of touch upon that as well, because I think that an attraction like Expedition Everest can be redistricted into a mythical animal area, while the Dinosaur, Dinoland area can also be expanded, but the two of them can be bordering each other. So I had two attraction ideas, one that is going to be more on the Chester and Hester side of things, and another one which is going to be more on the Finding Nemo the Musical side of things. The first thing I'd like to do would be an Extinct Animals dark ride, an Omnimover type system with the seating similar to Horizons. I know that Disney fans love to throw Horizons out there as anything. This is not Horizons by any means. It is really just the ride system that I want, where you can have the outward facing seating and point the direction towards whatever vignette you want to see. This would be 4-person Omnimovers, and you're going to go on a tour of science facilities discussing ways that scientists are looking to clone animals. The style in this presentation is actually going to be very similar to the original Jurassic Park movie, with something even comparable to Mr. DNA from that movie or Miss Minutes from the Loki series. It's perhaps self-aware of the moral implications of all this, and perhaps as a scientist who disagrees with the idea of even doing it. I actually said on the show, really lean into it and actually just have Jeff Goldblum be that scientist if you really want to. But at the end of the attraction, this is a Horizons type of vibe. You get to choose which extinct animal you want to create. And keep in mind, these are generally not going to be dinosaurs. I want to do non-dinosaur based extinct animals. So you can pick a woolly mammoth, a dodo, saber-toothed tiger, pick your poison. And you see a video of their creation. And the final scene is a large show scene with a bunch of animatronics layered with screens of extinct animals. And our narrator kind of looks in awe and concern over what we've done, and the ride ends. I do like the idea of some silliness. And at the end of the dinosaur attraction, the ride ends and we now have an iguanodon loose in the real world. So that's kind of what I want here, where the narrator that's bringing us along this attraction is like, well, now we have all these extinct animals that we brought back to life. What do we do with them? And there's no real resolution to it. I think something like that can be fun, where you mix in the science and pseudoscience with the ideas that you can bring back some of these animals. I wanted to do an extinct animals attraction that wasn't dinosaur. That might require a new name for the area, from Dinoland USA to something else. I'll let listeners decide. One thing I believe we suggested on the show was Pangea, but it's not entirely geographically accurate. But that's kind of the general idea for how I would expand the extinct animals side of things. I think it still needs to be rooted in the present, but a look back in the past. So we have one where it's actually time travel, and this is using science and pseudoscience to create an extinct animal. As for the mythical animal area, and this is going to be redistricting Expedition Everest as part of this, where you have Expedition Everest as a mythical animal-based attraction, and then this new attraction that's going to be roughly on the footprint of the Finding Nemo Theater, would be to represent mythical animals as inspired by the movie Shang-Chi. For people that have seen that movie, there is a big component of that movie that talks about and interacts with mythological animals with an Asian background. My understanding is that Disney, for whatever reason, mainly Harry Potter, doesn't want to dive too deep into the mythical animals of European folklore. So when you have an intellectual property, we know how much they love to use those, that ties into that Asian mythology of mythological animals. I think it is ripe for Disney's Animal Kingdom. The name that I actually gave this area that is now taking over Expedition Everest and this new attraction was Beastly Seaport, and I got some eye rolls on the show. But the approach here would be to represent Ta Lo from Shang-Chi in a boat ride, ideally using that same boat ride technology that's used on the Shanghai version of Pirates of the Caribbean. What I really want to see for the people that have seen Shang-Chi is a bamboo queue that we're guided through by Trevor Slattery. I love that character. I think you can have the creatures of Ta Lo that do tie back to Chinese mythology. So you can have, yes, it's in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but also tying back to the real mythology of the Chinese culture. You can have the Great Protector Lake Dragon thing. You can have a final battle with the Dweller in the Darkness, and special effects to make the animals/animatronics appear out of nowhere. I know that there are ride systems that have sideways drops for coasters. I'd love to see something new and innovative on a boat ride, but I also think that if that Shanghai Pirates boat tech is used in Florida, people will absolutely love it as well. So those are my two pitches. It's really the stretch of land I'm calling from Expedition Everest to where Chester and Hester's currently sits. We're going to effectively make two lands out of it, where we're taking Dinosaur as part of one land and Expedition Everest as part of the other land and butting them up against each other. I think my budget is probably pushing about $750 million, but I'm okay with it because it's not my money. I don't know what Ben and Josh came up with, but I can only assume that it is significantly worse than mine. Thanks.
I should say up front that I am not going to make any judgments on which of the Marty Called hosts has the best ones. They're all worse than mine, so what are you going to say? No, but seriously, I think this is a cool idea where Tim is taking the existing area, splitting it in half, and then kind of incorporating another area, which I think is a cool way to do so. You can think about what they did with Toy Story Land at Hollywood Studios, bringing in Toy Story Mania, or even when they added Avengers Campus, Guardians of the Galaxy was there. This is even more, I feel like, ambitious than that. But I think it's a cool idea off the bat to do that. Would you call these neighborhoods? No. No, we would not. We would not call these neighborhoods at all. I need to throw that idea out of my head. I don't think Beastly Seaport is my favorite name I've ever heard, also because even though the water's there, I don't know how much it would really be like a seaport, but I do get what Tim's doing there with the play on Beastly Kingdom. I'm going to look at that first, that mythical idea. And I see Tim's doing something similar to what I was thinking, which is to put a ride in place of where Finding Nemo, the musical, is. I just feel like having another large-scale attraction there is never a bad thing. And this is the first time we've really heard an idea of Shang-Chi being put into the Animal Kingdom, at least that I have heard. And I think it's a cool idea, especially because that film is a bit of a surprise to me, because if I think about how the trailers were, where they were really focusing on like the bus scene in the beginning and on the items in our modern world. And then they got to the part in the second half and I was like, I did not expect this to be what it's about at all. And Tim makes a good point about the shift to the Asian background with the mythical characters, which also fits with Asia, which is where Expedition Everest is. So it kind of flows well into that, and Disney can make some good announcement there. It's, of course, I would love to see the technology they use for Pirates of the Caribbean in Shanghai make its way into other attractions, especially when boat ride setup. And and Ben Kingsley, I mean, he really has a lot of fun with that character, especially in Shang-Chi, so it's great. It would be great to see him on there. The other attraction, I like the idea of the Extinct Animals dark ride. I love dark rides, and using the Omni Mover system from Horizon is good because then you basically have it up against the wall. So what that allows you to do is they don't have to fill in all sides. They have to fill in what you see in front of you. So there's some benefits there when you're putting together a dark ride. And I think, too, what would be cool about that is just moving away from dinosaurs and going into other different types of species. I don't know. I think the Mr. DNA might seem a little too similar to Jurassic Park, given what's over at Islands of Adventure. It's similar with Jeff Goldblum. But I like the idea of kind of doing something silly and offbeat. And Tim's point about kind of the end of Dinosaur fits really well here. And I just like the idea of also just thinking a bit more outside of what they have there now and working in something that is not connected to an IP, but I think people would really enjoy. It would be fun for a lot of people. So I think both of those ideas for the two big attractions are cool. Good job, Tim. I want to see this happen. And Disney, I'm sure, will get right on spending that kind of money. But it would be cool to see. And I think immersive dark rides versus the flat rides is obviously the way to go, just because the bar has been lifted so high that things like Primeval Whirl just don't cut it anymore, especially if you're trying to make this park the best it can be. All right, now I'm going to play the final submission. This is from Skipper Ben, who we know from the original Inside the Magic. I want to be clear, not the one that is currently in place where he appeared with Ricky Briganti on the podcast. He also writes for Attractions Magazine and is the third member of the Marty Called team. And Skipper Ben has some cool ideas that are different than what we've heard so far, which I always appreciate. Let's go to it. Ben, take it away.
Dan, thanks for asking me to contribute an idea to your show this week. I want to apologize everybody first for the ideas that my Marty Called co-host probably put out there. I can only imagine that Tim tried to convince you all that there need to be an expansion of Africa all the way over here to Dinoland and just make this one massive African area of the park. And Josh probably drummed up some idea that John Hinch and Bob Gurr originally pitched to Joe Rohde that got shot down that needed to be dug back up and put into this area. You know, boring stuff. I'm here for the fun, and that's what I bring to our show, and I want to bring to your show. And I think this idea actually is pretty simple now with some of the things that have been announced for this area of the park, especially with the Finding Nemo the musical coming back in a new form. And with the Dino Institute already over there, you can actually make this area a research facility part of the park, because when Finding Nemo comes back, they've announced that it's going to be themed around the Marine Life Institute. And we've seen things like this in other parks around the world with the Finding Nemo franchise. And so I think right now Finding Nemo just kind of sits out there all by itself and has no real rhyme or reason why that theater is right there. You could extend this into the Dinoland area and overtake a lot of that section. I don't think any of us would be super crushed if all of the Chester and Hester area was taken out completely, not just Primeval World, but the other things in there. Do some retheming, do some reorganization in that area of the park, and make this a research and development area where the Marine Life Institute can maybe extend into like the Dinoland Institute, the Dino Institute, sorry, and kind of give this area maybe some purpose and meaning. And you could do another Finding Nemo attraction over here. You could do Crush's Coaster in the Primeval World spot. And, the way that it stands over in the Disney Studios Paris park right now, it's, again, just kind of a Finding Nemo coaster out of nowhere. But if you did this as part of the Marine Life Institute, you could say that, rechange the story a bit to say you've developed a way to for people to experience the way that sea turtles have, traveled the sea, traveled through the East Australian current, and instead of you being a part of that story, maybe at this time, it gives you that. Gives riders that feeling of what it's like to be a sea turtle, while keeping that same ride system over there. And I've been on the ride; it's a blast. I would love for that ride to come over this way. It would just need to be shaped a little bit to maybe fit this narrative. But you could even extend this further into the Chester and Hester's Dino Treasures gift shop. That's a big chunk of land right there, and there's some space behind it that maybe there's another franchise that could have some kind of research and development facility put in there. We've talked about on our show, the Wakanda, stuff like that, going into one of the parks with the schools and the stuff that they talked about at the end of that film. There's a way they can maybe do that there, maybe even just extend more Finding Nemo in there. You've got the Sea Rider attraction from Tokyo Disney Sea that could go in that space as well. But I think an extension of maybe Finding Nemo through this area, making a mini Finding Nemo land, could be one thing. Or, like I originally said, they're doing something along the lines of just institutions where it's a research development. It kind of brings the science side of studying animals and studying the past with the dinos, obviously. It kind of maybe wraps that a little bit more. It might be a little... could be a little boring, maybe, with just a bunch of institutional buildings, as opposed to, really cool, like, theme lands, like floating mountains and stuff like that. But either way, it's better than what we currently have with Chester and Hester. I think we could use a refresh of that whole area, not just that plot of land that Primeval World previously took up. And you know what? If none of this works, we could just add some sing-alongs. There's Jungle Book could use a sing-along. There are so many sing-alongs that we could put in this area. Dan, if you got like 20 more minutes, I can keep going. Just send me a quick note on Twitter. I'll re-record another segment here, but I'll leave you this right now. Thanks for asking me to contribute. This is always fun, and hopefully it's better than what Tim and Josh submitted. That's all I really care about. Talk to you later.
First of all, I'm going to put a big abort on the sing-along idea. Abort! Just go away from it. It's not good. Not good at all. Get rid of all of them. But beyond that, I think Ben's ideas are really cool. I like the idea of the Marine Life Institute. If you really want to keep the Nemo characters or Finding Dory characters, at least find a way to make it feel comfortable inside the park. Institute like that will do that. There's also ways you can teach people things, but again, in a way that's fun and not dumbed down to just, oh no, Nemo's lost, or oh no, oh, please, no, none of that. None of that. I think it's cool that Ben brought up Crush's Coaster, which I have not experienced, but appears to be a pretty cool little coaster in Paris at the studios, and kind of reframing it to fit with the Institute is a fun idea where you're allowing people that most of us have not experienced it, but they get to experience it here, but in a new setting, in a new way. And that's what I appreciate, is when, even if you're going to have I wouldn't say copy, but something very similar to another attraction, another park, find a new way to make it fit inside this park. Not experienced it. And then, of course, the Sea Rider idea, which is in Tokyo, bringing that in there too as part of the R&D facility, is another cool idea. I hadn't thought that much about expanding the Nemo footprint when I was just thinking in terms of, it's a live show and it's fun and I appreciate it, but I was trying to think something different. So this is an interesting idea too. I prefer the thought of having it alongside the Dino Institute, where you still have Dinosaur and the Dino Institute, and then you have the Marine Life Institute. And you can find ways with cool attractions and everything else to still make this fun and have, the areas around it can be just a little bit like with Dinosaur, but even more to that to make them interesting and unique. You don't have to just have a block-sized building and call it an institute. So, Ben, I think these are cool ideas. I would love to see this happen, especially in place of Chester and Hester's Dino-Rama, which most of us agree should go. If you want it in there, that's great. But let's make upgrades to whatever is in Dinoland USA. It's the best that Disney can do. It fits with the rest of the park. It doesn't feel like, well, I really love the Animal Kingdom except for that part. It's something that all kind of connects. I mean, everything in the park doesn't have to be the same. I mean, Pandora is not the same as Harambe, is not the same as Expedition Everest in the Asia area. You can have different sections, but they need to sort of flow under the overall umbrella. And that's where I think a lot of the ideas from everyone fit that way, whether people want to keep Dinoland USA and adjust it, completely retheme it, kind of do a combination of both. There's been a lot of great ideas that I think all fall under the thought of what can we do to make this better and a more inviting place. What I've appreciated is we've had some characters and IP put in, but all of them seem to fit, like Ben's idea, with an overall framework of fitting the theme of the park and of the land. Even if there's characters, nothing seems dropped in and is jarring because you're all really smart. And that's why I bring in you to do this rather than me. And I spend a lot more time on what you're saying versus what I'm saying. Keep trying to make mine shorter, actually, my ideas for this, except for what I talked about Epcot. So that's going to close out this Improving Dinoland USA podcast. This is the final episode of the podcast for this year. I'm just going to take next week off, but I will be back in 2 weeks with my trip report, looking at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield, Illinois. I went over there fairly recently. And then I have another interview with Tim Landry, who was a Walt Disney Imagineer who worked on a lot of attractions. And I think you're going to really enjoy both of those coming in the first 2 weeks of January. Before I finish, I just want to say thanks to all of you. I really appreciate you and all the support for the show. I know it's been another crazy year, and while some things seem to be more normal, we're obviously not out of the woods yet, but I hope that everything is going okay for you and that you have whichever holiday you celebrate or have celebrated this month. I hope that you are enjoying it and able to spend time with people that you love, and that you're healthy and happy as much as possible in this crazy world. And I can't say enough how much it means that you're taking some time out of your day to listen to me talk about Archer Imagineering and a lot of others for more than 90 minutes. But it's really fun for me. I appreciate being able to do the podcast, and I am excited about what's to come in 2022. And beyond that, all I want to say is thanks and spread the word about the show. If you're with some family members that really like theme parks or really like Disney, and I don't know where it would come up, you just randomly at the table just say, hey, everybody. But seriously, any way you can spread the word about the show is the best way you can help to support the podcast. And I appreciate anything and everything you guys do to keep the show moving forward and heading along. And as always, the music for this podcast was written by Adam Hookey, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Thank you once again for listening to the show throughout 2021, and I will talk to you again in 2022.